Welcome to Canadian Music 80s, 90s, and more. I hope you like what you're watching. If you do, please subscribe to my channel. Be much appreciated. And I'm very glad to welcome Mr. Luke Doucet to my site. Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure.
Um, anyway, anyone who doesn't know who you are a very for hire guitar player. I know that much for sure, but you've also got one of the greatest bands I love called Whitehorse, um, who I've seen a couple of times. I first saw you open for the Blue Rodeo in Barrie, um, which just goes to show how much touring you've done and extensive touring you've done when you're playing Barrie. So,
Yeah.
um, I guess what I want to start with is, um, when did you start getting into music? Like, when did you get to the point where you're like, okay, I got to do more than just listen to music. I got to learn to play or.
Yeah. I took the obligatory piano lessons when I was 11, and I didn't enjoy that because there was a lot of I was learning how to read, pretty
Mhm.
normal standard, but it didn't inspire me. Um, um, and then there was a choir in my preschool in Winnipeg, and the school was called L'École Sacré-Cœur, and it was a French immersion school, and it was like kind of a holdover from the days when French education, at least in Manitoba, probably everywhere, was Catholic. And so there was a choir, and the material was sort of very traditional, like French, Franco-Manitoban, but also French Canadian, and also sort of Catholic, um, French Catholic songs. And so that I was pretty young. I was in like grade 3 when I did that, but I realized pretty quickly that I could sing. Like
Mhm.
I don't have a I don't always have a pleasing voice. Like there are certain environments where my voice is not great, but I realized I could sing high and I could sing in tune, and I could find melodies and harmonies quickly. And I realized that there was sort of an aptitude. It's like, oh, um, music is a thing that I can understand and that I enjoyed it a great deal. And that didn't I mean, maybe it had an impact on me, but mostly it was just sort of a thing. Okay, cool. I like music. That's fun,
Yeah.
and that was it. But then when I was 13, my mom got me a guitar for my birthday, and I found somebody in the neighborhood in Winnipeg to show me some chords, and I was learning, Dylan and Beatles tunes, Dust in the Wind, and all the
Right.
acoustic songs that you'll learn. Lola by the Kinks. Um, and that's cool. I was learning a bunch of songs, and then my father, who was a jazz guitar player living in New Orleans, he moved away when I was quite young. He um, he moved back to Winnipeg in the early 1980s because he had some healthcare issues, and moving back to Canada was something he needed to do. And by that point, I was 14, and I had started a band with some friends in junior high school, and it was Paul Davidson, and it was Laurie Rapson, and it was Fraser McKenzie, and we were playing Beatles and the Kinks and the Who and the Stones and the Runaways, or no, not the Runaways. Anyway, and we got a gig in this pizza bar, and Armando, who owned the place, was like, "Okay, you guys can play," and but he's like, "You're all 14, so this is a licensed venue. You're not old enough to be here." So somebody has to be like responsible for you. You need to find an adult who can be in the band and take
Yeah.
responsibility for you guys. And so I literally hired my father to be in my band. And he had moved back to Winnipeg from New Orleans where he was playing jazz. And as you can imagine, he figured there's not going to be any music really of the kind of caliber I'm expecting in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is what he thought. But it turns out there was a really thriving blues scene in Winnipeg that was largely anchored around Big Dave McLean, who still plays and is kind of a legend, and another guy named Brent Parkin, who's just an absolutely unparalleled guitar player. And there was this really rich, really respectful, really vibrant blues community. And so this band I had that was playing the Kinks and the Who and the Stones, we hired my dad, and he kind of started pushing us around a little bit. He's like, "Well, what about Little Walter? What about Sonny Boy Williamson? What about Hound Dog Taylor? What about Charlie and the Nightcats? What about BB King? What about Freddie King? What about Albert King? What about? And we sort of pretty quickly became a blues band. And
Mhm.
from that point on, we were playing 2, 3, 4, 5 nights a week. And I haven't had a job since, you know. I mean, I delivered office furniture for 6 weeks when my daughter was born because I was panicking. But basically, it's all I've done is just play in different bands. And so, yeah, it really started off by me thinking I was going to be a blues man, which is silly, of course. But, you know, it kind of, my dad had a lot to do with it.
But there's been a lot of bands that's come out of Winnipeg over the years. Like, I mean, I don't know what it was like back then in terms. I mean, I guess the Guess Who was your first real band that come out of Winnipeg. Crash Test Dummies were from
Yeah.
Winnipeg.
You know,
Um,
the dummies were in this, they were playing some of the same venues I was. I ended up playing with this band called Acoustically Inclined, kind of like a uh, hippie jam band, kind of gypsy
right.
jazz inspired. And we would play at the Blue Note Cafe, and also the Pyramid at the time, which was the Spectrum. And the Crash Test Dummies were kind of like the elder statesmen of the kind of young new folk crowd, like
Yeah.
of that. And they got, oh, the Dummies are like, and then they got huge. It was a mix because not only did they get huge, but they had songs that we kind of thought were kind of cool. Like it's like, wow, this is kind of clever, and we
Yeah.
haven't really heard this before. Like somebody like writing with the sort of witticisms of Elvis Costello or XTC with a baritone like Johnny Cash, like that had really never been done before. So there was a source of pride in the industry of being like, this is kind of cool what these guys are doing. So that was interesting when the dummies blew up.
And then the Watchmen got pretty big there for a little while.
Yeah, the Watchmen again. Right, there was something about that time, the late '80s, because I went to Calvin High School briefly, which is the high school that Neil Young went to, and I played some shows there when I was still in junior high school at River Heights, and the Watchmen would be again. They were kind of like they were better and they were older and they had more
Yeah.
pro gigs and they sounded really good. Yeah, it's I don't think I realized it at the time, but there was a thing. And then of course the weaker thans, they grew out of that sort
Hmm.
of propaganda, and the weaker thans sort of came out of that same, you know, the bands I'm describing, we don't all they didn't all come from the same musical background per se, but the community was small. Everybody kind
Yeah.
of knew everybody. Yeah.
That's cool. So where did you end up moving to get your career going?
Well, this I moved to Vancouver,
Hmm.
and you know, because I had acoustically inclined had been touring from Winnipeg to Vancouver for years.
Right.
We did, I don't know, we did 5 or 6 tours in a year and a half that I was in the band, and our booking agent was Frank Wiper, and he lived in Vancouver, and so he had a lock on Western Canada, so we would just go Winnipeg to Victoria and back, and in those days, you wouldn't just do one night, you'd do 3, 4, 5,
Right.
6 nights in each town. So we'd go to Saskatoon and we'd play Amigos, and we'd stay there for 5 or 6 nights. And we'd stay in the band house upstairs and we'd drink a lot of beer, and just like it was kind of a blast because I was what 19 or 18 at the time, and the rest of the guys in the band were quite young. We had a lot of fun. We played a lot of music, 3 sets a night, and so we really played a ton. But I ended up moving to Vancouver because that was, I mean, Vancouver's a, a dangerous and seductive place when you're
Right.
young because you go there from Winnipeg and you happen to be there on that one February day when the sun's out and it's not raining, and you're just like, oh my god, it's like Hollywood. It's literally palm trees on at English Bay, and you look at the mountains and the ocean, and you're just like, are you kidding? How can this possibly be Canada? So I had that experience a few times, and I was like, I gotta go there. And I knew a bunch of the local bands because Frank Wipert, who was our agent, he represented a bunch of cool indie bands from
Right.
Vancouver. You know, bands like I don't know if Frank represented all these bands, but these were the people that we knew. There was Roots Roundup and the Hard Rock Miners and um, Bob's Your Uncle. You know, those were some of the bands that were kind of in the neighborhoods that we traveled in, and the bars we played. They'd be on the same bills, and they were great. Like some really good punk rock music came out of Vancouver in the late '80s, early '90s. Like really kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think Vancouver's always had a pretty thriving music industry for well, as long as I've been into
Yeah,
music anyway, there's always been like, obviously the Bruce Allen managed bands who've got really big,
yeah,
and the producers as well, like Bob Rock, and
yeah. I mean,
there's
that's the A-list stuff, like the big time stuff that went international. But I mean, just below that, well, maybe quite a bit below that level, 5440
Mhm.
and
Spirit of the West.
Spirit of the West. Yeah, they were fantastic. And yeah, so there was a really thriving um, independent scene that was coming out of Vancouver. Yeah, and it was cool to be a part of it. And I started playing with Sarah MacLauchlan when I was pretty soon after I got there,
Mhm.
and then she was I mean, she got really famous pretty fast,
Mhm.
because when I met her, she had released Touch and Solace, which were really good records, like really kind of forward thinking records for the time. But they didn't really blow up in the States. And then Fumbling Towards Ecstasy came
Yeah.
out, and I literally joined the band as that record was being mixed. So I didn't play on it, but I toured it. And she went from being completely unknown to musical. I don't know. It got big fast. It's really fun. It was weird standing back and watching her become this superstar. We were just all in the back of the tour bus going, "Holy shit, what's happening?" And she was getting famous.
Did you jump on board when she got into the Lilith Fair stuff? And is that when you got
You
on
know,
board?
no, I got on board before Lilith, and I did the Fumbling Towards Ecstasy tour,
Mhm.
which coincidentally is turning 30 this year, and we're going to do it. We're going to tour it again this
Wow.
spring. Yeah, I was so young on that first tour that when we were in the southern states, we were still playing movie theaters, like small review theaters, and
Right.
I wasn't old enough to be in the venue. So I'd be on the tour bus, and a security guard would have to come and get me from the bus and walk me into the
Yeah.
back door of the theater onto the stage, and then just sort of stand there and watch the show. And then when the show was done, he had to escort me off the stage back onto the bus because I was too young to be in the venues. But um, so I did this. The tour lasted like 2.5, 3 years, and we were all pretty exhausted by the end. And Sarah was a big star. We worked hard. Like we did 250 shows over the course of the whole cycle. And by the time she started putting the band back together after that, I was kind of done. I needed a break, so I quit. And I didn't actually play with her again for 10 years. And in that 10 years was the whole Lilith thing. I missed it all, which is
Oh,
kind of a
really?
drag. It's like all that. Like I remember watching from the sidelines, when like shit, I ducked out at a bad time. But we stayed friends, and in like 2000 or 2002 or something, like 2004, she asked me to come back and do some shows, and I did some shows, and now I've been playing with her ever since. Again, it's been another 20 years that I've been back in the band, and we write together and we play, and now Melissa also plays with her, and it's
Mhm.
fun. She doesn't play very much. Sarah doesn't tour very much, not like she used to.
No.
When she does, we try to go if we can. Sometimes there's conflicts and we're not able to go, but we
Yeah.
certainly like to when we can. Yeah.
Have you recorded much with her?
Yeah. Laws of Illusion, Surfacing. Am I right about those two records? Um, and I've written a few songs with her.
Okay.
So yeah, we've done a fair bit. I mean, the first thing we ever recorded together was a couple of tracks off Rarities and B-sides, which probably came out in, I don't know, maybe 90,
Think-
95, maybe
Yeah, I have that
something.
somewhere because she had her cover, a couple of covers on that, didn't she?
I think Dear God by
Yes, that's right.
XTC. That might have been the first thing that I ever. And we also did a cover of Tom Waits' Old 55,
That's right too. Yep.
which I played on. And
Oh,
then there
what?
was a live record that I don't know. To be honest, my sense of the chronology is all mixed up. But yeah, I've recorded on a bunch of records, and the thing that probably excites me the most right now about our relationship, other than the fact that we've been friends for 30 years and I cherish it enormously, is that now we're starting to write. We're writing more together.
Right.
So I can be in Toronto and she's in Vancouver, and we just fire notes back and forth until we both feel good about something, and that's a fun process.
So you mentioned you're going to do a 30th anniversary for Fumbling Towards Ecstasy tour.
Yeah.
Is that
Well,
going to go Canada or is it going to go worldwide?
um, it's it's not been uh, it's actually hasn't been announced yet. I don't know if I'm
Oh, okay.
actually allowed to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
I don't. So I'm going to plead the fifth on what's real and what's not real.
Right.
But yeah, there's talk about a thing in the springtime. Yeah.
Very cool. And who are some of the other guys you played with? Like when you were off from her for 10 years, you obviously done a lot of other music other and your own as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I was mostly in that time, I was doing sessions, like playing on people's records in Vancouver, but it was mostly indie stuff. It was mostly like
yeah.
sort of unknown, sort of indie, folk indie artists who were trying to get their thing going. Um, so and really what happened and what most of my energy was directed towards was I started a sort of surf power trio of my own, this band called Veal.
Mhm.
And we made 3 records, and we toured a lot. And uh, that, funnily enough, um, the first record that we ever released was called Hot Loser. And that record was released on Divine Industries, which was a small label that
Mhm.
was managed by Alan Moy and Jason Grant, who managed 5440 at the time.
Right.
And so they signed us, and we released that record on that imprint. And then it Shauna DeCarte released the subsequent 2 Veal records. Hot Loser never got it. So it looks like that record's probably going to get a release, and we're going to tour it for the first time. Veal hasn't toured in 20 years, and looks like we're going to tour this spring also.
You going
So
right
that
across
that will
Canada
be
or just regionally?
uh, again, we're not sure.
Yeah.
This is all like to be confirmed, but I'm kind of spilling the beans here on what's coming up in the spring. But the Veal thing was like, it was like heavily inspired by like the Pixies and Camper Van Beethoven and the Ventures, and also in the early 90s, like as music sort of like the grunge and the Seattle thing was exploding,
Right.
I was really into Dinosaur Jr. and I was really into the Posies, and I was really into Teenage Fan Club, which of course were Scottish. They weren't really from American at all. But there was a certain part of that movement that was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And all of it was sort of filtered through my love of surf guitar, and my like there's elements of television in the Veal
Okay.
stuff, and I don't know. It's just it's like it's kind of punk rock, but it's a trio, and it's surfy, and at the same time we thought we were writing pop songs, even though we weren't. They were never really pop songs. They were, I don't know what they were, but yeah.
The only reason I ask because I'm a transplanted Ontario in the Maritimes now, so
Yeah.
and we don't get too many
Yeah.
good get acts like yourself coming out this way. We do the odd time. PEI just had Big Wreck here,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
and we had Sarah Harmer here last year,
Yeah.
and she's one of my favorite. I'm sure you know her quite well.
I mean, I do, I know Sarah fairly well, but more than that, I know her as a friend, although I've known her for many years, is that I'm in complete awe of her music. Like, we've been friends for a long time, but
Yeah,
every time I hear her records, like, I'm just like, I'm stunned. Like, I can't, I feel like I'm listening to like Kate Bush or something. Like, she's just such an incredible artist.
yeah. Like I mean, I got into her when she was in Weeping Tile. That
Mhm.
was when I first got into her, and I'm
Yeah.
amazed that she still sings some of those songs live. Like I was just blown away.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I love what she stands for. I love her voice. I love the way she sings.
Yeah.
So when
Me
did you
too.
form? When did Whitehorse get formed?
Right. So I moved to Toronto in 2002 or 2000, something like that. Um, and I was still making Veal records. And then I 6 Shooter Records started. Shauna DeCartier and myself kind of
Right.
schemed up this thing. She was trying to help. She was managing me, and she was trying to find the right record deal for me, and we weren't finding what we wanted. So she said, "You know what? I'm just gonna let's just start. Let's just do it ourselves. We'll start a thing." And that became 6 Shooter Records. And we recorded solo records. I made one, two, three, 4 solo records with Shauna with 6 Shooter. And and for those last couple records, Melissa and I had met, and she was singing in the band.
Mhm.
Melissa was. She was singing and playing guitar, and I was playing in her band. because I was producing records for Melissa. She was playing on my records, and we were working together all the time.
Yeah.
But occasionally there would be a conflict, and she'd be on tour somewhere, and I'd be somewhere else, and we weren't together. And it was a bit jarring because
Mhm.
we really relied on each other a lot. Not only did we play in each other's bands, but we had a lot to do with each other's albums. So when we weren't together, there was really a significant part of the thing we were trying to do that was missing. And we just kind of realized this is silly. We should just do this thing together all the time. Like I kind of felt like everything I did got better when she was around, and
Right.
I hope that maybe she felt the same way or feels the same way. But and so at one point it was just like, this is stupid. We should just do the thing, make it a thing.
Right.
And so that would have been 12 years ago that we started Whitehorse. Yeah, and we've since made, I don't know, 7 records.
Wow.
A lot of records.
And you're
Shauna
still
asked me one day a long time ago. Shauna DeCarche said, "What is it? What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to make 20 albums." and so here we've done that now. So for the first time since I've in my 33 years of playing music full time, we're actually taking a year off this year. Not that we're not playing, we're doing some playing, but we're not recording a new record and we're not going on tour.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys are
He's
still
not as Whitehorse.
you still keep fairly active as Whitehorse when you can, though.
Yeah, and there's not, we worked really hard in the pandemic. We made 3 albums, and and yeah, we just didn't. We were sort of relentless, and this year we thought let's slow down and let the juices flow, so we can when we decide to make another record, we'll be inspired, and instead of just feeling like we have to plug ourselves back in. But we'll stay busy. I mean, there's
Right.
lots of stuff to do. There's always a benefit show or a song to record, or a couple of, we're going to do some gigs in Winnipeg in a couple of weeks, some Christmas themed shows. Then we have a show in Burlington later in December. Yeah, there's always stuff to do. We're just not actually going on tour.
Do you produce anyone?
I do produce some stuff, not as much as I wish I did.
Yeah.
Only because like in the last 10 years, I just haven't had time, but now I do. But the latest NQ Arbuckle record is my work, and I've done a bunch of records for NQ over the years, and then the Whitehorse records and my solo records and Melissa's solo records, and there've been a few things here and there, but the recording world has just changed so much, and I haven't really kept up. Like I don't have a home studio where I can bring an artist in and just record an album.
Oh, okay.
I'm not, and the days of like, well, yeah, you hire me and then we'll go rent a studio and then we'll make a record. Like those days it's not that they're gone, but not everybody has those budgets, and
Right.
it's hard. The people who tend to make records these days are people who have a space at home. They have a rig at home, and you
Right.
just record at home. And I've sort of been reluctant to go there because I'm not sure that I want to stare at a computer screen full time, 24/7. And I find the
Right.
people I know who have home studios and who are working, they're working producers who work all the time. They do spend 12 hours a day staring at a screen. And I'm holding out. Like there's a bit of sort
Yeah.
of get off my lawn in my, I'm like,
Yeah.
well, no, if I wait long enough, eventually people are going to hire me. And it's like, I'll play, I'll sing, and I'll play bass, and I'll play
Right.
keyboard parts, and I'll play guitar, and I'll sing backups, and I can even play drums, and I can help you arrange the stuff and do all that stuff. That's, so just hire an engineer and we'll get to go into a studio. But sometimes that works in certain circumstances, and other times I just realize it's not realistic in 2023.
That leads to my next question. You are proficient on several instruments.
Well, proficient. I mean, if they have strings, I'm pretty good on a bass and a guitar and a banjo,
Yeah.
and I can play the pedal steel and lap steel, and I can, sure, yeah. But I'm not a great piano player. I can put parts together. Where it's like if I'm recording a record, if I'm producing a record, I find myself on a keyboard a lot, being like finding a little thing, and I really like the parts that I come up with. But I'm not a very good piano player. Like if I can't just sit down
Right.
and play you, We Are the Champions.
Right.
Although my son can.
That's awesome. At least somebody can.
Yeah.
I've seen you play before. You've opened for a lot of pretty proficient, famous bands. Like I saw you open for Blue Rodeo and Barry. And I think the thing that I was I was sitting out in one of the grandstand seats, I was just blown away by your White Falcon guitar.
Oh yeah.
I think it seemed to me that Blue Rodeo was pretty fascinated by that guitar too.
I mean, yeah, I guess so. That's funny because those guys have their guitar collection is pretty humbling. Like they have
Yeah,
nice guitars. That's a funny guitar because I got that guitar 20 years ago. It was my first tour back with Sarah, and I had all these old pawn shop guitars like harmonies and
yeah,
things that I thought were cool, had cool sounds and sort of unusual instruments. And when I had a guitar tech on the tour who pulled me aside and he said, these these guitars are not playing in tune, and I'm getting blamed for it. And I was like, oh well. And meanwhile, I'm thinking they're not out of tune. Like I can hear them. Like I can,
yeah,
yeah, kind of ish. Anyway, but he said, would you mind could you just get like one brand new guitar, just so you can have one new guitar? And I said, well, I guess. He's like, well, what do you like? What would you really like if you could have just one brand new guitar? What would it be? And I said, I don't know, like one of those big stupid white ones like Neil Young played in
yeah,
1969, or like I've seen Robert Smith from The Cure play one, or like Brian Setzer, like that big stupid white thing. He's like, oh, you mean like a white Falcon? I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Like one of those Gretches. And so we literally looked at. He showed me the catalog, and I went, oh, there, that's the one. And 3 weeks later, a box showed up on the tour, and I pulled out this thing. I was like, I guess this is it. And I just played one big G chord, and like my head exploded. I was like, I can't believe what this sounds like. It was hard to play. It's not an easy guitar to play. I'm not a very big guy,
yeah,
so playing a guitar that size was like I had to get my arms around it and what I'm
yeah.
doing. So it was hard. It was hard, but yeah, you know, I love it. I haven't done a show without it since. Like it's a fantastic instrument.
Getting back to the Cure, we were talking about a bit before we, I guess, came on air. I've
Yeah.
always been a fan of your cover of Love Cats. I always found
Hmm.
it kind of an interesting choice of a cover to do, being as your
Oh,
kind of rockabilly-ish kind of sound to what you
yeah.
do with Whitehorse.
Yeah, I mean that sort of surf rockabilly thing is that was also an accident. When I started playing with Veal, when I started that band, I had just moved from Winnipeg and I had a Strat and a Twin. I was like, I don't want to be
Right.
a Strat Twin guy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm gonna put the Strat and the Twin in the closet, and I gotta find what's the furthest thing away from a Strat. And I found this old Harmony H77 and bought it at N Jams in Vancouver, just because it was the weirdest thing I could find. And then I started a three-piece band. When you're in a three-piece band, you have to play the low strings because if you're all shreddy up here,
Yeah.
it doesn't sound. You're playing chords and singing songs, and all of a sudden you go,
Yeah.
woo, and the music sounds terrible. I mean, unless you're Van Halen, it's not. It just doesn't work.
I like the t-shirt,
So
by the way.
thank
That's
you.
awesome.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
Van Hagar logo too. That's pretty
yeah.
neat.
Unfortunately, I'm more of a Hale. I'm more of a Roth era fan myself, but whatever. Um, so Love Cats, I feel like I don't know if we got away with that. I mean, I recorded it, but
Oh, it's a fantastic cover. I would say you
well, I
did.
thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I like it. I really like it. But you know, sort of the sacred tenet of like depressing sort of British Midlands new wave, like it shreddy. Like it's not even that I played shreddy. It's not my style, but like guitar solos that are sort of ambitious with
Right.
like rockabillyisms. Like it's not really in the spirit of the Cure. It's not really in the spirit of sort of like 80s depressive 80s new wave,
Yeah.
which I love. I love it. I love the Cure. But I thought like I can see where these things overlap. And I'm gonna do that thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean I did it because I thought it was great. I loved it. But you know, I feel like Robert Smith has got to put a bounty on my head.
Oh no,
But
he's you can't deny the influence of bands like that. You know, the Smiths,
no,
the
yeah,
Cure,
yeah. Oh, man.
just I mean British music, period. Like I mean, I like to cover Canadian music, but I find a very good similarity between some Canadian and British music
Oh
from
yeah.
the 80s and the 90s. I find they're more original than some of the American stuff I hear. I've always found
Yeah.
Canadians had a more distinct voice, and so do Brits for that matter. I've always found Brits had a more distinctive sound and whatever to them, but that's just my observation. I don't know if
I
you'd
mean,
agree with that.
well, that's interesting. I think about the West Coast music that I liked when in the 90s. Like I remember, well, I mentioned 5440. Like when
Yeah.
that first single Baby ran,
Oh
like
yeah.
that is, I don't know. I don't know what it sounds like to everybody else, but to me, that sounds like a British, like like sort of new wave rock song. Like that. Well,
Yeah.
so much of their music to me sounds like more inspired by the Smiths or the Cure or the Charlatans or the Chameleons or Happy
Right.
Mondays or I
Yeah.
don't know. You know, it has that thing. And then I think about the Grapes of Wrath. They had
Hmm.
that song, All the Things I Wasn't, which is so astonishingly kind of like Beatles XTC
Yeah.
inspired. And yeah, there was a lot of great stuff on the West
Well,
Coast.
that whole album that song was on, The Grapes of Wrath did had a real Beatlesque sound to it, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and
yeah.
I believe they're still together. I mean, what a
Oh, yeah,
fantastic band.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then, I mean, even some of the other bands, like some big good bands came out of Saskatchewan, like the Northern Pikes, and,
yeah.
and I thought they had
Definitely
come
Pikes.
somewhat of a Beatlesque sound to them in some of their songs too. You could
That's
definitely
interesting.
hear
When I first heard the Pikes, and it would have been
mid '80s.
I was out and he was we were listening to the Chalk Circle and Northern Pikes,
Hmm.
and I remember the thing about the Pikes is they kind of reminded me of REM. Like there was and I mean I guess
Okay.
REM are sort of British inspired too, but they sounded like when I didn't realize when I found out they were a Canadian band for the Prayers, I was impressed because I thought, oh, they must be American or I don't know, whatever. But yeah, Snow in June, that's a great record.
Oh, I mean, I can't think of anything I don't like by the Northern Pikes. I just
Yeah,
I
yeah,
found them to be incredibly good songwriters to start, and
yeah,
then there's
yeah.
the
I
sound they
agree.
used to get out of I was always told back in the '80s what you could get out of Canada wasn't as good as what you could get out of the States in terms of technology and recording, but I don't
Yeah,
agree with that at all because they got some really good sounds out of some of those albums.
I mean, especially when you consider that by then, by the late '80s, the indie rock movement had begun. And whether I'm talking about like early Pixies or Husker Du or like who were the bands that were recording sort of independently, and they were all doing it on relatively small budgets too. And like studios had 2-inch tape machines back then, and
Yeah,
whether that tape machine was in Saskatoon or in Minneapolis didn't make much difference.
no, you're absolutely, I agree with that. But I mean, it's nowhere near what it is now. I mean, everyone can do it
Yeah,
independently now, so
yeah,
it's just, well, you haven't jumped on the studio, your own home studio yet, like you said, but a lot of people can't.
yeah. I
Or
mean, I when need be, I'm just digging my heels in.
yeah,
I'm still like I'm still like la 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 la. I want to believe that the old world of everything, well, not everything, but the old world of music, where recording process is really sacred. You get into a space with people, you look at each other and you record
right.
together, and you feel like an amazing thing is happening. And
Are you originally
that's
from the Maritimes?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
were you?
My father was born in Grand Étang, Cape Breton, Shedican,
Okay.
and my mom is from Amherst, Nova Scotia.
All right.
Amherst, and I was born in Halifax.
Oh, excellent. So are
Yeah.
you influenced by any of the East Coast music at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So my father, Roland Doucet, um, he, Marcel Doucet, his cousin was a fiddler and really good and like a real party fiddler guy, like playing East Coast music. And so that was part of that was peripherally in my life as a kid. I would see that happening, and I remember my mom and my stepdad coming home um, from the Misty Moon in Halifax, and like sort of drunkenly babbling about having seen like um, Dutch Mason and Matt Minglewood Blues Band and stuff. I remember hearing those names as a kid because my parents would go and hear their shows. This would
Right.
have been in the mid 70s. But in terms of like the East Coast music that I'm familiar with, you know, I'm a kind of I was late to the Sloan party,
Okay.
but I might you know, hyperbole so far you can go with it, but they might be the greatest of all. For me, like I it's like it doesn't, you know, there's four of them and they all write well. And I mean they all actually write well. It's not like it's not like they got one Ringo who does Octopus's Garden and
Right.
then that's it. Like, you know, they're kind of an anomalous thing. And like when I say I came late, I mean I came to that band through Pretty Together, where they had that single, The Other Man.
Right.
And I was just, and it's funny, you mentioned the Northern Pikes. Like that single to me sounded like
Right.
late 80s, kind of like there was something reminiscent of a different era that I really loved about that song. And then I was like, okay, I need to have a closer look at what's going on with this band. And then it just opened up and I was like, holy shit, these guys are unbelievable. I do find it mesmerizing.
And then guys
Different.
like Joel Plaskett blow my mind
Yeah,
every time
I
he
love
does
Plaskett.
something.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Um,
wonderful. His
are
thing
you
is
familiar with
fantastic.
any PEI artists like Catherine McClellan or
Yeah, I know Catherine. Yeah, she's great.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Tara McLean.
Karen
I've actually,
McLean?
she
Yeah.
was she was signed to Network, and she sort of came into that world right around. She's lovely. I mean, yeah, I think that tradition of sort of like folk. I use the term loosely. I was going to say singer songwriter, but I remember Andrew Scott from Sloan when I mentioned singer songwriter, and he said in our band we call them singer songwriters or
Right.
singer sing records. But not pointing the finger at anybody in particular. But there's such a rich history of, you know, introspection and people um, singing folk songs, I guess, folky songs
Yeah.
from the East Coast.
Well, I got started doing this by helping two guys run a Stomp and Tom fan club on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
I've interviewed a lot of guys that played with Tom over the years,
okay,
like live in concert. And I guess one of the guys that really stood out to me was Dave Gunning, who is
okay.
very much a singer. I don't know if you know him at all.
I'm not sure. I feel like, oh, you know what? I think if he was sitting here, I'd be like, oh, yeah, of course, Dave, how's it going? You know, I'm terrible
Yeah,
with names, but
but
yeah,
he never stops. Like he's constantly traveling and doing music. Like he's one of those guys that just never. And he plays house concerts. He plays, he comes here at
yeah,
least 3 times a year.
yeah,
And he plays a lot with, I don't know, do you know JP Cormier?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they play
JP's a
together.
monster.
They play together a lot. JP is one of the best guitar players I think I've ever seen.
Absolutely blinding, like
And I guess Matt
crazy.
Anderson's really getting big too. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
he's a
that's fantastic.
mind-blowing musician too. I
Yeah,
could see you
yeah.
playing with him someday. But
He
he
had,
never stops either. Like he's
you know
constantly
what?
touring.
Matt would have no use for me. Like
No,
what he does, all the things that I do, he's got the bases covered. He doesn't need a guitar player, and he certainly doesn't need a singer.
no, that's for sure. But he's
Yeah,
one of those guys that he never stops. Like he's constantly
yeah,
playing, he's constantly recording. You'd hope he slows down one day, but uh,
yeah,
you come here, he sells out every time he plays anywhere here in the Maritimes. I've
yeah,
seen him in Ontario in small
yeah,
festivals where nobody knew who he was, but here he's like a superstar.
yeah,
It's amazing how certain regions have
yeah.
that that going with
I
their
feel like
local musicians.
The East Coast has a. I mean, that whole thing about regionalism, like it was a, it was more of a thing before social media. Social media has kind
Yeah,
of to some degree done away with it because everybody spends so much time in that realm, and in that realm
right.
there's no, those borders don't exist. But I feel like the East Coast has been able to sort of retain a sense of its identity in ways that other parts of the world haven't. You know,
Yeah,
maybe it's partly to do with geography because it's far enough away. It's 16 hours from Montreal, right, or whatever. So
yeah. It's
it's
not a
isolated to some degree.
and then if you ever want to go to Newfoundland, that's not an easy traveling thing either. So
No,
um
and then when you go, you're stuck for a week because then there's weather and your flight's canceled and there's You know, there's only so much screech you can drink.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. I can't thank you enough for joining me today, Luke. I've always wanted to talk to you. You've always been one of my favorite musicians since I saw you open for Blue Rodeo. I've followed you quite a bit since then.
No, it's my
Um,
pleasure. No, it's really fun to have a chat.
um, yeah, I'm hoping maybe we can do this again when you get some more stuff coming out. If you want to come promote it or
Sure,
something like that, I'd be happy to allow you to do that or do that with you, promote stuff. And
sure. I appreciate that.
so, yeah, no worries. And I hope you make it out here sometime to play some shows.
Well, there are 3 Whitehorse shows uh, in the Maritimes, and they are the dates. I'm just going to look them up because I think it's February 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
But it's Halifax, Fredericton, Moncton, I want to say.
Okay.
Anyway, that's February 2, 3, 4. That is happening. So,
See if you can sneak
gonna,
Charlottetown in there somewhere.
I mean, I think the dates are already booked, but I would love to.
The trail side, that'd be the venue for you.
Which one?
The trail side in Charlottetown.
I don't know if, I mean, we've been.
Yeah. Or the PEI Brewing Company is becoming quite a venue here in Charlottetown. Now that's where Sarah Harmer played when we saw
Okay.
her. And Matthew Good's been here twice.
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite Canadian artists. Like I just love the way he writes songs. But
Yeah.
yeah, you gotta get over here to PEI. We'll show you a good time.
Here we go. Let's see, February 2, 3, 4, Fredericton Playhouse, February 2, Lighthouse Arts Center in Halifax on Feb 3, and the Capitol Theater in Moncton on February 4.
I'll have to see if I can make it over for that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot for joining me, Luke. I really
Yeah, man.
appreciate it.
Pleasure. Take care.
Take care. All the best
Okay.
and have a good
Yeah.
holidays.
Yeah, you too.